Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I'm with investigative journalist, author, and all-around smart guy, Dan Lazare, and we're going to talk about the politics and the fallout. I hate to use that word, political fallout um, from the Nord Stream bombing. Let's talk. Hello, and for those of you who have not had the pleasure of watching Dan Lazare, listen to Dan Lazare, he's actually one of my favorite commenters. He's very well read. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to history and international geopolitics, and he really can put this stuff together well. So, Dan, interesting stuff. Let's start with your thoughts on the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council meeting the other day. Ray McGovern talked, Jeffrey Sachs talked. I know you have reviewed all of that stuff. Your thoughts on that whole dynamic?
Well, I mean, first of all, all the permanent members have vetoes, so therefore it's kind of I wouldn't call it a shadow play, but it's a diplomatic ritual, and Russia is trying to get this out there, get this Seymour Hersh article out there, and hold America's feet to the fire. It's calling on other countries to help it out, one of which is China. But there are many other countries that are following this very closely and forming opinions as to what happened last September 26th. So, it's interesting. Global. There's such a thing as global public opinion, and governments listen to it. And even though those governments are corrupt, crazy, so and so, they still, keep an ear to the ground. And so that's what's going on here. Russia is appealing for world support on this issue, and I think that it will eventually get it.
Dan, as a man who spent a lot of time in court, here's what I know. Someone, and this is the old game. Someone blurts something out, the defense or whoever says, or the prosecutor, whoever it is, that says, I object, and the judge says, objection sustained, but the jury heard it. You know what I mean? As far as a technicality, yes, it cannot be entered into the court records and things of that nature, but the jury heard it. I also think they saw it as an opportunity to get some very wise and knowledgeable people who were Americans. So it's not just Russian propagandists, people who were highly respected in their fields, to come in and to present what I saw as unbiased, critical evaluation of the circumstances.
Yeah, but it's really hard well, the goal is to destroy the U.S. narrative by presenting clear and unequivocal evidence. I mean, a member of the destruction team, going public, some party to the operation, spilling his beans to the press, and you can verify it. It can still be anonymous, but it can still be verified in various ways. The Hersh article was great, but it is not it doesn't quite hit it over the fence. I mean, because it relies excessively on just what seems to be just one anonymous source. And so since we have no independent way of evaluating that source, we have no independent, objective way of evaluating his thesis. But of course, everyone's operating via a process of elimination. I mean, since the press agrees it was not Russia, that story never made any sense to begin with. It was, the idea that Russia would blow up its own pipeline was was so stupid that only an overpaid CNN talking head could believe it. But that leaves the question: if it wasn't Russia, who wasn't? Who was it? Clearly, that leaves only one candidate: the U.S. And the U.S. just can't sit on this forever. It can't stonewall. I mean, eventually, it's got to answer questions, and just rather than sort of issue, meaningless denials. Anyway.
One of the things I thought that was interesting was the argument from the people who are trying to prevent this investigation, which is interesting. That's a whole nother discussion itself. You would think that only the perpetrator would want the investigation stopped. Tried to argue that, well, Sweden and Denmark, we've got people looking into this investigation. But as Ray McGovern has stated, Sweden looked into it. They did an investigation, and they came out and said, for reasons of national security, we can't tell anybody, even including Germany, what happened. The circumstantial evidence is so damning that when you come to the to the UNSC and say people are already investigating it, and the investigators say, yeah, but we can't tell you what we found, and they are allies who are, one might argue, have not argue, they are named in Hirsch's documents as having been told something that was going on. So the circumstantial evidence here is so damning. To me, it reminds me of what happens with WikiLeaks a lot. People say, I know they overthrew country X, and then WikiLeaks would let loose some cables, and it would just really reinforce what the circumstantial evidence had overwhelmingly forced everybody to the conclusion that we'd all been forced to make.
Well, I think that things will reach that point. I mean, I think at some point, rather, I agree that the Danish and Swedish and German investigations are ludicrous because they're acting individually and they're under intense pressure not to come to the logical conclusion to say, yeah, somebody blew it up, but we sort of can't say who it is. So clearly there should be an all EU investigation, open and public. In which they investigate what happened and take evidence from all sides. And most important, put the U.S. on the dock. Make the U.S. submit to a tough cross-examination. Put Blinken on the dock. Subject him or Jake Sullivan. Pin them to a wall, cross-examine the hell out of them, and see where this leads. And we know damn well where it will lead.
Yeah. Let's talk about politics here in the U.S. and we'll hit each party, but party by party, we'll hit the media, etc. In looking at this, Congress as a whole, so there certainly appears strong evidence, or at least reasonable suspicion, as we say in law enforcement. That's your minimal standard is reasonable suspicion, which is below probable cause. I taught all of this stuff, which reasonable suspicion is a little more than a hunch, right?
Yeah.
So we have met all of those standards to suspect that there was a constitutional violation, that the executive branch acted deliberately with malice and aforethought, acted in a manner that would avoid their constitutional responsibility for notification of Congress and acts of war and all these kinds of things. Okay, let's start with each party. What do you think we learn about the radio silence in the Democratic Party with such an obvious issue in front of them? And I mean, I don't hear from the squad, Bernie Sanders. All they're saying is things like this: we got to support Joe Biden in 2024 so he can win. What do we learn about the Democratic Party?
Well, so you're referring to Nord Stream, right?
Yes, regarding this.
Silence on the Hirsch article in this entire issue. Listen, the so-called left has been led into a trap. I mean, and of course, it's a very difficult trap to avoid. But AOC entered the Democratic Party. She made a big splash. She was elevated to higher positions, offered various leadership positions, and clearly she is under intense pressure to toe the line with regard to the Ukraine. And they just don't have the weight, the political weight, the moral weight, the intellectual heft to buck it. So she has just gone along. So amazingly, the only dissent is on the right, and that is a disaster. I am not an advocate of the left-right coalition. That is a disaster because essentially it means that people who are sick and tired of the war have no choice or are left with no option but to look to the militias, to Rand Paul, to Donald
Trump. Even. Yeah.
Huh?
To Trump even.
Yeah. and Trump is playing the same tune. I mean, he's talking down the war, saying the war's a disaster, the war should be ended, and clearly indicating at some kind of a behind the scenes deal with Russia to sort of patch things up. But that's a long time away, and meanwhile, the world can blow itself up several times over.
Yeah, and the other thing that we see is that within the party now, everything is lockstep. When they say we're going to vote on X, the party, there are no fringes, there's no left, there's no right. This is an amorphous blob, and that has been wholly consumed by this neocon element of America. And so there is nary a voice in the Democratic Party. There's nobody. When Tulsi Gabbard was in there, there were people that were in there that, whether you agree with them or not, every now and then they'd stick their hand up and say, hey, I got a different. That is completely cleared, and it is pretty horrifying, Dan.
Tulsi had her moments, right?
Right.
There's no doubt about it. She got in a few zingers there. So let's walk this through. So that means the only opposition to the war is coming from the ultra right. So when the war proves to be a disaster, essentially the center of gravity will shift further to the ultra right, and people like Marjorie Greene will be, they're already major forces, but they'll be even more major forces than they are now. And I don't have to explain to you what America, in which Marjorie Greene is a major force, what that means for the country.
For social policies, for the level of austerity that they're going to, all of those kinds of things. Let's talk about the Republican Party. You make a good point here. And if we could reflect it back to the Democratic Party, if there were a group of people in the Democratic Party right now like that, who said, regardless of anything else, this Ukraine is a bad idea, let's start giving money to these people, things of that nature, something that is popular. When the smoke started to settle, let's say, let's just say we're fortunate and we get out of this thing, and several months from now, as is inevitable with whether it's Iraq or whatever, at some point these wars start to go bad and public opinion wanes. Let's just say this starts to happen in 6-8 months. That element in the Democratic Party would become much more powerful, and they draw the votes. The Marjorie Taylor Greenes and that element of the Rand Pauls of the Republican Party, I think, are going to become very powerful. They already are quietly starting to grow, and they're feeling their oats because you can see them tweeting. I think they're going to become a very powerful force within their party.
I think Marjorie Taylor Greene already is a very powerful force. I mean, she's essentially whispering in the ear of Kevin McCarthy several times a week, and so I think the ultra right is very powerful. But I think if the war goes badly over the next 6 or 8 months, then I think we'll see they will gain in power. And since there are no anti-war elements whatsoever in the Democratic Party will suffer a loss. But we've got to keep one thing in mind: the war may not go badly for the U.S. I mean, Russia could crack. It doesn't look that way, but that possibility can't be eliminated.
Right.
So therefore, and that would mean the center would hold for what it's worth. It would be a shot in the arm of the Democrats.
Right.
Those are pretty grim options.
I agree with you. I don't think it'll happen. And when you're evaluating to be a reasonable, unbiased evaluator, you must maintain all possibilities. Right. And if that happens, then it's a different thing. Something that I think I want to get your comments on. This East Palestine, whatever the hell it is in Ohio thing happens. That goes down. Biden goes to Kiev. And this thing's a beast. This thing is a monstrous environmental problem, right? Yeah. And political problem and everything else. He goes to Kiev. Tulsi Gabbard, who now I suspect is going to run in 2024 or something. Why? Because she showed up there. Trump shows up there. He's handing out water. Everybody's there But Biden, Buttigieg finally ambles in, who I think Buttigieg has been an unmitigated disaster from a public. What he's done under the scenes, I don't know. Public relation, I think he's been an unmitigated disaster. So the Biden people once again demonstrate what I believe about neocons anyway. We are only concerned about foreign policy. The American people are irrelevant to us, which plays right into the right wing America first. And your thoughts on the East Palestine and the political dynamics around this thing?
Well, I think the failure of the administration to send anybody, a top official like Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg to East Palestine at least is it's a blunder of the first order at the very least. And Trump has neatly exploited it, and Trump's a smart guy. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, there's further evidence of how the basic tectonic shift is to the right, and there's the liberal left is paralyzed, and I guess the radical left is torn as well. So it's the near-term outlook is not good, but the long-term outlook is always positive.
2024. These are two important battleground states.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Ohio. Yeah. The first thing I think is, if we're talking politics, Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Yeah.
They didn't think about that. You lose both of those states, there is no path to the White House.
You're absolutely right, but Biden is, the administration has been doing a much better job than most of us, including myself, would have thought possible a couple of years ago. I mean, Joe Biden is, I don't know what he's up to, but he's certainly put together a formidable team. But what have they done but to plunge the U.S. into war? I mean, it should have been obvious that the Democrats were a war party and that Biden himself was a war candidate. I mean, the Democratic Party has been essentially raging against Russia, and raging in the most irrational way since Trump declared for the presidency in June or July 2015. And so they've been talking themselves into a war, and lo and behold, 13 months into the Biden administration, what do they wind up with? War. So they're completely irrational. They have no idea what they're doing, and they are, they're also obviously careening towards some kind of conflict with China. So, the two-party system, the official Washington is just out of control, and things are very dangerous.
And here's something that's interesting. Trump does a video the other day, and he specifically mentions Victoria Nuland. Elon Musk comes out the other day, and he specifically mentions Victoria Nuland. We're seeing very powerful people coming to look. I'm not going to say I love or hate either one of them. They who they are. Very powerful, wealthy people starting to say, we have a very dangerous group of people, the Newlands, the Sullivans. You know what I mean? Your thoughts on those couple of things and what that tells us?
Well, the Neocon clique is very dangerous. There's no question about it. I mean, the Newlands are a remarkable family. Victoria Nuland's father is Sherwin Nuland, a physician and longtime columnist for the New Republic magazine back in the 80s. I mean, an outrageous racist Zionist. They have another uncle, a cousin or uncle named Donald, who's a classicist at Yale. And then you have Victoria, and then you have her husband, and he just published a book called "Ghost at the Feast: An Account of America's Rise to Power" that is doing very well on the bestseller lists. So they are a major force, and their logic, their apocalyptic logic, is driving U.S. foreign policy. I mean, Kagan, Robert Kagan's whole line is America, America must strive for global primacy. Can't allow any country to challenge that in any serious kind of way. So therefore, they are determined to eliminate their competitors, one by one. So their message to China is like, is hold my coat while I beat up your ally. And so then when I'm finished with that, give me my coat back so I can beat up you. But that's what the U.S. strategy is, and that is what we're seeing played out in the Ukraine. It's just quite clear.
Dan, I remember when Biden came in and they were negotiating supposedly for they were negotiating for the Iran nuclear deal. And you said then, number one, they ain't never going to do it. But number two, that Biden's foreign policy will certainly end, bring disaster. You even said disaster after disaster. It's going to be nothing but a disaster.
Yeah.
And the thing that you predicted was after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a debacle, which certainly they should have left, but the way they did it was an absolute debacle. You basically said that's nothing as compared to what's going to happen in Ukraine, the debacle, which I'm calling the mother of all debacles right now.
And Ukraine is merely a warm-up for the really big show in the Western Pacific.
Here's my thought. Here are my thoughts, though. Yes and no in this, that in the way that it's a proxy war for the U.S., right? Okay, we're going to use this blunt object called Ukraine and beat up on Russia. There's a proxy war the other way, a little bit different. China has to make sure at all costs that Russia doesn't lose, which I don't believe they're going to lose. So, but I'm saying, I think what China's doing is this. If you look, they've been bragging, basically saying our trade is bigger than ever before and it's growing. China's job in this is to make sure that Russia's economy is sound. But mainly so, one of the big reasons is so there's no internal pushback and China has the financial wherewithal to do that. If China has to spend $2 trillion, that $200 billion a year is nothing for China. If they got to spend $2 trillion, they have 13 trillion in reserve, whatever. The China-Russia alliance here, that as Brzezinski, all of these people, no, don't ever do that. The China-Russia alliance, your thoughts on that?
Well, if China does take the step of supplying Russia with what do they call it, fatal aid or fatal
and I think that's bullcrap. I think Biden. I don't think Russia needs lethal aid. I think China's job is to maintain the financial part of it. And China, think about this, Dan. China comes out and says, we're going to come out with a peace deal next week. And Blinken goes, they're going to provide lethal aid. And if they fly, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Okay. I mean, maybe you're right. I mean,
if you look at the timing, within one day after they say we're going to come to a peace deal, all of a sudden Blinken screams they're going to provide lethal aid.
But actually, I think if Russia came under serious pressure, to follow your scenario, I think at some point China would be forced to sort of applying lethal aid. Yep. And in that case, it would really be a conflict between NATO on one side and the PRC on the other side, and that would be, there'd be Russia and Ukraine in the middle, but NATO and the PRC would be equal players, and they'd be the source of the industrial strength needed to see this conflict through to the end. So that's where I think things are going. I can't see how they can't go there. And what could be more dangerous? I mean, right. the mind reels.
Yeah. So I tend to think China stays in the background. And one thing we're seeing about Russia that seems obvious to me, and talking to people in Russia and what have you, and Russia is basically gearing up their industrial. Russia, I mean, let's face it, this is existential to Russia. It's not a 6 month. They don't need to be over in 6 months. It's
existential to NATO also.
Right. Yes, in a different way. I think Russia is planning. It's from what I understand of people in Russia, what things are going on. They tend to believe this: Russia if they got to be in Ukraine for a year, if they got to be in Ukraine for 20 years. Russia is planning on making this thing long term. That turns us back to Nord Stream, because one of the issues is the ability to hold your coalition together. And how does Nord Stream? Apparently, there are people in the streets everywhere in Germany today, worldwide. We get back to it long term, and I mean long term, 1 or 2 years. How does Biden and his incompetent morons hold their coalition together when they're beating them over the head with blunt objects every day?
Well, so far, but they aren't completely incompetent. That's the problem. I mean, they have put together a solid war that threw Russia off balance. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, Russia is only now recovering, but there's still big problems on the Russian side. That the bickering between Prigozhin and the military is really interesting. We not really quite sure what it means, but there seems to be some kind of a few cracks at the top. And so, they're, I just wouldn't discount. I mean, Blinken and Sullivan, they're smart in some ways. But I agree that the longer the war goes on, the harder it is to hold the coalition together. And the big story is Nord Stream, because that's going to come out. And when that comes out, that will be explosive. I mean, essentially, the U.S. will have been found guilty of violating Article 5 of the UN Charter. And Article 5 is what Joe Biden in Warsaw the other day described as a sacred oath, that a blow to one is a blow to all. And so, of course, that would mean that the U.S. had conducted engaged in an act of war against a partly owned German energy facility of great, economic importance. So how will Biden be able to hold together the coalition after that becomes obvious? And the war drags on and on and on, and maybe China steps up its assistance to Russia. At which point this thing's going to turn really hairy.
Well, the other part of it is the economic problems look at the UK. I mean, man, their economy is spiraling out of control. I talk to people in Germany. I have a friend that follows one of my shows in Germany regularly, and he's very upset because, he's saying we basically can't afford anything anymore. And how long can they take the pain in light of knowing that the U.S. was kind of, if you're in Germany now, you're kind of figuring out that, I don't know if it's 20 or 80% of your pain, but a significant percent of your pain wasn't caused by the Russians.
Oh yeah, that news will be devastating. And if the economy if the economy turns downward, it seems to have stabilized the last few weeks, but if it turns downward, those political sentiments like that will become harder and harder to ignore. That's the whole point. So the more that's just clearly like the dynamic, because this question of Nord Stream could be so decisive in shaping the intra NATO politics, and so therefore this is what makes this whole incident of such crucial importance.
Yeah, I think another thing that I think is of consequence, I'd like to get your comment on. Look, if I say use a word, I studied the philosophy of Zen, and one of the discussions in Zen is the difference between words and symbols and what it refers to. When I make the sound tree, what am I referring to? I'm referring to this thing over there, but what is it really? Okay, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Okay, discussion. When I use the word NATO, what am I referring to? That word NATO is what? It's a noun. What does that refer to, right? So what we were told, is that it is a defensive alliance, right? Which means A, it's defensive, and B, it's an alliance. You can make that argument until reality presents something else. So now you look at it and say it's defensive, but the leader and organizer and controller of it united with other members of the alliance to attack another member. That's number one. Number two, they argue we were defensive. We were so what were they doing? They were doing a practice Balt Ops 22, they called it. And what was that? A bunch of ships and military hardware come together to practice protecting themselves from a Russian attack. And they used that actually as cover to attack a member of their alliance. So you're telling me it's defensive and you're telling me it's alliance. How do,
It's
now
neither.
that the cat is out of the bag, Dan, keep going with this.
Yeah, it's neither. I mean, it's neither defensive, neither defensive nor an alliance. I mean, if the head of the alliance attacks, secretly attacks a other high-ranking member, I mean, that's not defensive. That's offensive, number one. And if that happens in an alliance, it's obviously no more an alliance. So it's some kind of U.S. diktat. And if the harder Nord Stream becomes to ignore, I mean, the more the Europe will have to face up to that reality. The only trouble is that it seems that the anti-U.S. Forces in Europe are increasingly on the radical right as well, with a partial exception of France, where France Insoumise is still Mélenchon's party is still a power, and they're providing a left-wing, attempting to provide some kind of left-wing alternative. Die Linke in Germany is doing the same, but they're muddling their message by hooking up with right-wing figures, etc. But again, in Europe, it's the radical right which would probably reap the benefits if the truth of about Nord Stream finally becomes impossible to ignore. So. Every epic finds its path to hell, and the U.S. is finding its own path now, or the early 20th century capitalism is finding its own path now.
You bring up a good point that I think is of consequence to discuss, and that is, again, when you say capitalism, my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr., no great lover of capitalism by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things that he talked about was the nuances. When you say socialism, there are different types in different countries and different strains of it. When you say capitalism, there's different strains of capitalism. There was the Nordic kind of version where they had some kind of apparent social democracy, which seems to have been sucked up. But what we're looking at now is this predatory neoliberal capitalism. Yeah. And the question is this: is this a strain of capitalism, or is this the inevitability that capitalism will turn into that? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, very much. I agree with the latter statement. I mean, I think that the capitalism in the post-war period has evolved. It began, the Social Democrats were very influential in the after the war and well into the early 70s. They kind of set the tone. Capitalism by today's, well, first of all, there was also a boom, a long-term economic boom. And capitalism seemed to fulfill the needs of the population, but since the mid 70s, that's been increasingly unclear, and as a consequence, the U.S. has taken the lead in regimenting capitalism, purging all those social democratic elements, imposing a neoliberal orthodoxy, and essentially. And also pushing down working class standards, it's revving up commercialism, consumerism, et cetera, et cetera. But that neoliberal period has also turned increasingly violent and militarily aggressive, starting with the 1990-91 Persian Gulf War, just as the USSR was imploding. And that was a dramatic assertion of Western militants, and that has only built and built and built. So you have these two trends towards neoliberal economics, and increasingly bellicose imperialist military policies. And that's what we're facing now. And this is where, this is the scissors effect. They are tearing society apart. Those two trends. And we don't know where they're going to end up. There's a little bit. Is there really any doubt that things are spinning out of control, and that no one in America certainly is thinking seriously about where this is going? I mean, after all, you have an administration that completely lost its head over a wandering weather balloon, and which eventually used F-22s armed with Sidewinder missiles to shoot down $12 nylon balloons that you purchase over that the hobbyists purchase over the internet. Is this any way a responsible political leadership? It's shocking, just shocking.
Well, the other thing, I look throughout the West and I see how the neoliberal, we'll just call it neoliberalism, its effects on politics, how it kind of eventually kind of absorbs all arenas. It has absorbed the political arena, and it produces the Trumps, the Bidens, the Liz Trusses, the Bojos, the Olaf Scholzes. When you look at the type of leaders, these people are clowns that are produced.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, this is really true. And Joe Biden.
Yeah,
I mean, this is really true. I mean, I think it has to do with a neoliberal evacuation of politics, weakening of the state, just promoting, just sort of the rotting the liberal establishment from within. I mean, I think of David Cameron, when he pushed for a Brexit referendum, absolutely confident it would go his way, and then the look of utter stupefaction when they realized it had gone the wrong way. I mean, there is it really is a race of Lilliputians, and they are just not thinking about where this is going, and that's what makes it so potentially catastrophic. I guess we're running out of time here.
No. Continue. We got. Look, I don't have anywhere to be. No.
Okay. I just want to say that the one book that everybody keeps hearkening back to, which is really in retrospect sort of one of those extraordinary foreign policy documents we've seen, was this Zbigniew Brzezinski's best-selling book, The Grand Chessboard, which came out in 97 or 98. I forgot what it was. And it was remarkably accurate in the way it foretold the unfolding, way it described the unfolding Democratic Party Neocon global strategy. And what he called for was the arming of Eastern Europe, the essentially bringing the Ukraine into NATO, arming it to the teeth, and using to break up Russia into three pieces: a European, a Urals, and a Siberian. I forgot what it was, and then then exploit the hell out of Central Asia, and use its force, therefore, establish itself as a force on both sides in the Western Pacific and in Central Asia, therefore to carry out a kind of pincer movement against China. Now, this is not my paranoid ravings. I am merely describing quite faithfully, quite soberly, what Brzezinski outlines in this book, and it's what we're seeing unfold today. It's astonishing, and the instability will grow.
Another book I would recommend is John Ralston Saul wrote a book called Voltaire's Bastards. And in that book, he describes what we were talking about. One of the things that we just talked about was the incompetent clowns that are, again, Bojo, Liz Truss, Trump, Biden, Kamala Harris, Schultz. And we look around and we see these people that are clownish, and we say, how do those people come to power? And in that, he describes these technocrats, and he basically describes how these people, rather than live in a real pragmatic world, they create, the way I always put it is, as the psychiatrists say, neurotics create castles in the sky and psychotics live in them. And basically, he describes how they come to create a narrative. And then they live and act within and they're perfectly comfortable within the context of the narrative. I'll tell you something I came up with. Oh, go ahead before I get to anything else. Go ahead,
Well,
Dan.
that was the famous uh, Karl Rove was anonymously quoted in the New York Times Magazine in 2004 or five as saying it's our world now. You people, you people in the reality community. You think you know what's going on, but we control the reality, and therefore we can change history as we go along. So just watch what we do. I mean, it was a statement of just complete power drunkenness. Um, uh, but that is still the prevailing dynamic in Washington, and that's what's so dangerous.
Well,
Anyway, much to talk about. This is only going to get more interesting.
yeah, well, one of the one of the things that I think that takes me right to is this term, consensus. I was talking with someone yesterday, and this kind of came to me, and get your thoughts on it. What we hear, what is taught in the vine-covered universities of the elite now is a consensus reality, which is just that. If we all come together and we agree that this is true, then we move forward as though that's true. We all come together and we have this consensus.
Yeah.
That's the narrative they're building. It's a consensus
Yeah.
narrative. Now, here's what's important. That's translated into this misinformation, disinformation thing. If I control Google, if I control whatever, and I live in that consensus reality, we all come together and we all agree that Dan Lazare is a werewolf. Forget it that there's no such thing as werewolves. That's the consensus, and we all come together. If someone goes out and they tweets, but there's no such thing as werewolves, that's disinformation.
No.
They have to be thrown off the platform. So this whole misinformation, disinformation is a result of these people living in a consensus reality. They come up with a consensus. And based on their consensus, anything, no matter how true or pragmatic, outside of it is by its nature defined as misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, they're put it together, right? Well, America's always been a very conformist culture. I mean, I'm old enough to remember some of the great books that were sociological books written in the 1950s, like The Lonely Crowd, and America has always been noted for its conformity, and so this coalition, and as American culture spreads abroad, American conformism spreads as well. It's very funny. It's kind of an interesting dialectic between American individualism and American conformism. I mean, the more individualistic Americans think they are, the more conformist they really turn out to be. So, so what they're doing that now, and all the official press. I mean, the New York Times has become just bizarre, and all the official press, they're just pumping out the propaganda right and left. They've got all these yes men, yes people in Congress, and the only ones who are daring to challenge it are fools like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So where are things heading? It doesn't look good.
Well, there's something else too, I think, when you say that all the people that challenge it. One of the things that I found, and I found this myself on the street, walking around the streets of DC, or if I go to another city, inevitably people walk up to me. Hey, I watch your channel. Hey, I saw you on this. That is this, the growth of alternative media. The CNN's ratings are cratering. Mainstream media's a lot of their ratings are going down, and more people are moving to alternative media. It's amazing to see how alternative, and I think that's a positive thing, how alternative media is growing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Twitter is very important. No, you're correct. Um, yeah, so I mean, yes, I mean, the Democrats are trying to control the narrative to impose a certain blinkered view. on on political discourse and marginalize everyone else who refuses to conform. The problem is that the number who are marginalized grows bigger and bigger until you can't be sure who's marginalizing who. So I think that that then, and the alternative media are very important. Very important. Media is very as media. The New York Times can no longer control the media. It does control a certain portion, but there's a growing segment outside it. But it's good, bad, and indifferent. I mean, there are a lot of nuts, and there are some smart people. So it's a great big, it's a great big medieval fair of political opinion.
Which is kind of, to me, what the First Amendment guarantees. You know what I mean? Unpopular speech. You can have someone go on and line and say whatever they want to. You know what I mean? I'm a big First Amendment guy, as long as they're not advocating for violence or whatever. If they want to say something that I think is kooky, I just watch something else. Something that I think is interesting, again, with Nord Stream. It blew up on alternative media, and I think there was about 3 weeks where they ran from it on mainstream media. And here, in a few days ago, the New York Times still haven't touched it. The Washington Post now brings it out, and they're talking about. Now, granted, they're poo-pooing it a little bit, but they were forced to talk about it, and I think that was mainstream media. Go ahead.
Apologize. I didn't see that post.
Yes, yeah. There was a little bit of. Yeah, they're claiming this and claiming that, but they had to acknowledge it. They had to discuss it a little bit. And there was on the online version, there was a link to it. And I think it was because alternative media was beating them over the head, saying, see, they're never going to touch it.
When did this article come out?
Within, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay.
You know what it was? It was a response to the UNSC meeting. That's what it was.
Oh, great. No, this is really important. I mean, it's really interesting if this if pressure can build, and I think pressure will build. But I think that people should do everything they possibly can to cause it to build. The U.S. has got to come clean on this thing, and when it does come clean, I clearly think that it's guilty, and when it does come clean, I think there will be. The consequences will be very, very big.
Global South. Let me get your thoughts on that, because I know you follow the Global South. Recently, at the Munich conference of all incompetent people, they put, for obvious reasons, they put Kamala Harris out. And she essentially did a George W. Bush. You're either with us or against us. And the Global South is clear. We've had go home, Yankee. Your thoughts on how this whole thing has played out as far as the Global South? I would even go to say this: the Middle East, the United States thought we've got the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and all of these are just our vassals. It hasn't played out in the same way they thought. So Africa, the Middle. Let's start with Africa, Latin America before we go to the Middle East.
Yeah. There's no doubt that that the U.S. is losing the argument in the third world, because the third world is very pissed off against America's overbearing foreign policy, and therefore, is glad to, doesn't buy America's arguments. How it sees through, it clearly perceives their self-serving quality, and so. So they're pissed off, and they're unwilling to fall into line, and they're kind of glad that someone is finally standing up to the U.S. So yeah, and they have every reason. I mean, Africa has been quite notable. Latin America has been. Actually, Brazil under Lula seems to be a little more sympathetic to the Biden point of view than Bolsonaro was, but I'm not really quite sure.
The jury's still out, I think, on Lula. We'll see. But I'll put it like this: they're not jumping on board the coalition of the willing by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. And the U.S.'s arguments are just transparently self-serving, and that people are not stupid. They see that, they perceive it. It's only the smart ones, supposedly, who are fooled by their own rhetoric. So things are going to be very rocky for NATO, very rocky, And I think that Nord Stream will play a big role in this process. Anyway, I gotta run. I gotta prepare dinner for
All right. Well, no
the
problem,
family.
man. It's been a great. I've been busy all morning
Right.
anyway, but it's been great talking to you. I always
Yeah.
enjoy a conversation with you because I feel like you're a guy who you're not, I'm locked into a certain place and you're not necessarily locked into that place. You're kind of more things looking at things broadly, and I like to get a little bit of different perspective, and I think you always I always have a good time talking with you. So thanks a lot, Dan. I certainly look forward to talking to you, and we will be in touch certainly next week for many more interviews.
Thank you for letting me rattle on.
All right, talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.
And all right, there we go. My friend Dan Lazare. As I said, if you watch it, you will see this. And I think that, you got to understand something about me. I am where I am when it comes to politics. Dan has some areas where we disagree. And if you watch us, you'll see there are areas where Dan and I disagree. But I think it is critical to talk, not just talk with people that you agree with. I think it's critical to have discussions with people that have alternative perspectives. Last week when I went to the rally, again, Dan didn't agree with the rally. Dan does not agree with the anti-war rally I went with the left-right coalition, things of that nature, right? But I don't say, well, I hate you, Dan, so I'm not talking to you again. I say, well, good. There's someone that disagrees with me about this rally. I didn't bring him on to talk about that. We got other fish to fry. But Dan and I have had this conversation, and I've listened to him. I have also set up kind of a email line between friends of mine who agree with the rally and disagree, and they're having a conversation. I truly believe that it is productive for people who have disagreements to have a discussion, not just to sit around and hug each other all the time and say how right we are, because sometimes I have had instances. Example, I had Scott Ritter on early. Scott Ritter took a lot of heat very, very early because I had him on, and I had him and Ray McGovern on, and he said, yeah, they're bringing in a lot of people, and at some point they're going to have some successes. The Ukrainian army is going to have some successes at some point. And everybody went, you're out of your mind, Scott. And lots of people called him, a fool, an idiot, blah, blah, blah. Well, September came along, and, for whatever reason, there were some successes where they had a lot of people on the contact line. The Russians had some people areas where they didn't have enough people to defend. They had to retreat. The Ukrainians advanced, and they got some apparent victories, right? And at that point, Scott said, I told you that was going to happen at some point. But he also said, but in the end, that's not going to change the outcome. Right. So at that time, he took a lot of heat, but in the end, people said, okay, whatever. So Dan and I don't agree on everything, but Dan's a real smart guy, and I listen to him. He's very, very knowledgeable. And I just listen to the areas where we disagree, and I just make note of that. And I just say, well, I'll look at the future and I'll revisit it with Dan. And at times I revisit things with him and I say, well, you said this or that a while back. What do you think? So keep in mind something, guys. It's very important to have productive relationships with people that you disagree with, but it might be even more important to have productive relationships with people in areas where you have some level of disagreements. As I said, Dan's a good friend, and there ain't a lot of areas. There's a few areas where we disagree. I would say he tends to feel like he says, well, I think the Russians are going to win, but that's not written in stone. And I tend to feel that it's written in stone. I tend to say Newland and the people are blithering morons and idiots. And he says, well, don't discount them. They're smarter than you think, but they're insane and they're crazy warmongers and things. So we have some areas there where we don't disagree, but it's in the aggregate, we're in the same place. And that is, man, these are some evil bastards. And, we'll be lucky to make it out of this alive. But Dan does always, we didn't get to it, but he always does, when we talk in apocalyptic terms, he always does come back to say, but we have to be positive that in the long run, good things are going to happen. And I look at one of the areas that I'll mention that particularly is when it comes to the global South, when it comes to Africa, Latin America. Certainly due to what's going on now, they're looking at some lean times. They're looking at some issues of increased inflation and things of that nature. But I would make this argument that in the long run, they're looking at a change in dynamics where there may be new currencies, there may be new economic avenues for them to explore where they can get out from under the traditional colonial powers of the US and France and the UK who exploited them for their resources. So they may have some lean years, but if we get out of this okay, which I hope we will, and I have confidence that we will, they're going to have some opportunities to grow. So I think that you got to have some positivity there. At any rate, let's see. Anything else? I'm going to see if we got some super chats because I jumped out of the last time, and I'll go all the way to the top and see if we got anything in the way of super chats. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm going to give it a shot. All right, let's go. We're looking for super chats. If anybody asks a question, I want to make sure that I answer it. And we're going to start with Nat Turner. Garland, do you think the German people will one day grow a spine and possibly force the government to withdraw from the NATO alliance, leading to its implosion and collapse? Yes. Mm-hmm. I don't think that. I'm glad you asked that question. Great question, Nat Turner. Yes, I do believe that will happen. I'm not going to use the word grow a spine because that implies that they're too weak. I think one of the things is that they are very, very much propagandized. I do think that they have been, they have a propensity there to that, people don't want to touch, but there is a propensity there that if the government points them to this group and say, hey, that group over there, you should hate them. Germany kind of has a history going along with that, whether we like to admit it or not, as does the United States, let's be honest. But I think the cold and the economic pain is going to cause them to question their leaders. And I do think that this Nord Stream thing is a bomb with a very long fuse that ain't going to stop burning, and it's going to blow. So I agree that NATO has to eventually collapse now that the reality of what it is has come out. So very good question, Nat Turner, and I am with you 100%. Let's next go to Anthony Pinza. Says, don't go starting another international incident on Twitter again, Garland. Yeah, how about that? I didn't know already. I didn't know. How crazy is that I can make a tweet? It just goes to show something, and that is that the narratives that the neocons are creating is unstable and easily revealed, right? Easily uncovered. And that just a joke when you have a narrative that is as frail, that is as brittle as the neocons narrative, it's easy to expose it. So let's face it, it's only logical to look at Ukraine and see that the US is pumping weapons into a country on the border of Russia, and then look at Taiwan and see that the U.S. is pumping weapons into a border or in a country on the border of China, and listen to what the U.S. politicians say and figure out that this is going to turn out the exact same way. So yes, thanks a lot, Anthony. I will try to refrain from starting international incidents on Twitter, but you know what? I think it's I didn't do it, no intent, but I think it's a good thing in that it started a conversation, over Taiwan that needed to be started. And that was this. This is the conversation. For all of the political or military games that you play or political discussions that you have of how this turns out, physically, how would a physical confrontation between two nuclear superpowers turn out for the people of Taiwan? That's the ultimate question. If you live in Taiwan, do you get out of this alive? And obviously and clearly the answer for most people in Taiwan is going to be no. So do you really want that reality to visit you? You look at Ukraine and ask yourself, do I want that to be my reality? And I would imagine most people look at their kids and say, I don't want to get blown to smithereens or duck in a basement while the bombs are hitting day and night and I can't get food and water. That's not something that most people want to be in the midst of. So I started a conversation accidentally that needed to be started intentionally. Bella, thanks, Bella. Is that possible? They have already planned something evil and we're not going to have a 2024 election at all. That's why they don't care. Here's what I have to say. I will be honest with you. For this reason, I remember in 2004 when people said Bush is not going to have an election because whatever, right? 2008, they said, oh, the Republicans they'll never have an election. It's not going to happen because they're going to XXX. 2012, Obama's going to stop the election. He's really going to do this. 2016, the Democrats and Hillary don't want an election. Trump's going to stop an election. So every 4 years, I hear we're not going to have an election because the people in power are going to do such and such. Here's the way I look at it. It seems to me no matter who gets elected, they always maintain power and they get all of the tax cuts for the billionaires and corporations and all the things they want. I think they're perpetrating a fraud. Maybe it ain't really an election, no matter who wins. If they already own both parties, what do they care about the election? They're always going to have an election. Maybe what we have is the illusion of an election. In reality, they're just changing public relations officials for the oligarchs. That's what I think. Who's next on the super chats? Who's next on the nobody so far? Oh, here's a question I got to answer. And it is, let's go. Kimberly Mims says, I can no longer recommend an academic path to truth seekers. I can't believe I have reached this point. Well, let me give you an example. I'm in DC and I'm familiar with the academic institutions. Georgetown University is known as the path to the State Department. And if you talk to people that go there, it is absolutely nothing but a mind control operation. I mean, they are pushing the memes, the Blinken memes, I know someone who was going to a class in Georgetown, taking a postgraduate course, and they wrote a paper on Assange, and nobody was happy with it. The administration didn't like it. The professor didn't like it. They are so now what we have is we have a lot of universities. Here's what I'd say: go to a community college. Community colleges are really good, but a lot of particularly the more elite universities, now are nothing but propaganda operations, to be quite frank. Either that or they've been bought out by some corporation or billionaire. There's the Koch building. Hey, go to the economics building, paid for by the Koch brothers. That's George Soros and the Koch brothers. The Liberation of the Earth by William Tenn is a great sci-fi short story. Well, thank you very much. And that's Sterile Neutrino. Thanks a lot, Sterile Neutrino. That's a good one. Okay, next. Eric Suarez, my main man, Eric. It's not about winning the argument, but to enlighten each other. You are correct, my good friend. Eric's great, man. Check him out. He's got a great book about Alex Schwab out. All right, let's go over to Rockford. Okay. Thanks a lot, Scott Johnson. Scott Johnson, I certainly appreciate that. All right, Zach has something to say. Let's hear it. Lula is the vaccine salesman with Pfizer protection. We assumed, especially with all the good coverage and Biden friendship, then rumors of forced jab protesters. Finally, the other day, I was watching Children's Health Defense Brazil, and Brazilian doctors were interviewed, terrified of Lula and his government. They said he's forcing jabs and is rolling out the Ministry of Truth for doctors. Yeah, I'm hearing some things that give me the heebie-jeebies when it comes to Lula. All right. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I'm hearing some things that are fairly horrifying. All right. Because, as you know, I oppose I oppose the vaccine mandate. I don't believe that people should be mandated to take that. I believe in the same way that if I'm 85 and I've got certain illnesses and I go to the doctor, they're going to prescribe a particular method of addressing it. And if somebody's 19 and they don't have any illnesses, the method of addressing it will be different. And that person who's 19 will have the option of choosing whether they want to take this or that. And the person who's 80 something will have the option of choosing whether they want to take this or that. I don't believe in medicine where my dad had cancer and he elected not to do the usual stuff that they do. And they said, oh, you've got to do it right away. He said he didn't want to. And my thing was, it's his life. And if he chooses not to take the treatments recommended by the doctor, he's only got but so much time. And he lived 4.5 years and they gave him 6 months. So I say it's a person's choice. It's a person's individual choice. I supported my dad's choice. He passed away, lived 4.5 years, multiple myeloma, bone cancer. And I didn't say we have to mandate that he takes radiation or that he takes, you know what I mean? But the bottom line is it was his life and it was his decision and I supported it. So that's the way I feel. I believe in people's freedom to make a choice on how they're going to address their medical issues. I don't think there's anything crazy and radical about that. And says, do you think the U.S. is involved in the triple Pemex explosions? I think AMLO recently privatized all refineries, processing plants. Is the U.S. now going to be an industrial sabotage game? Oh, now going to be in the industrial sabotage game? What could be the consequences? Yes, the U.S. is definitely in the industrial sabotage game and has always been. Whether they're behind any particular explosions, it's getting to the point that everything that happens now around the world, people are suspicious of the U.S. And it's because the U.S. is up to no good so much. So as a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, let me give you something else. There were earthquakes in Turkey, right? And I'm like, oh my God, earthquakes. And Turkey and Syria. And there were people who right away said, I wonder if the U.S. is behind those earthquakes. Now, I don't think they have the technology that I know of to do the earthquakes. But here's what I understand. They're up to so much dirt around the world that if somebody stubs their knee, on the bed when they're walking around their bed at night in the dark, ow, I hit my thigh, they're going to say, I wonder if the U.S. is behind it. Because they're behind so much, it only stands to reason that people will suspect them of everything. So I don't get mad at people whenever anything happens around the world and they say, do you think the U.S. is behind that? People are like, that's crazy. I'm like, look, the U.S. is behind so much dirt, it only stands to reason that people are going to suspect that they're behind everything. It's reasonable. Thank you, Garland. And yes, in Germany, most people are extremely propagandistic. But with Cy Hirsch's article, it's helping people to realize. Greetings from Germany. Thanks, Imzu. Well, that's good news. It's good to know that the German people are waking up, that the German people are getting some good information. Excellent. Vladis, has a scripture for us. 1 Peter 5th chapter 8th verse. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. A cautionary tale for Taiwan. Good one, Valdez Mosley. Excellent. Yes, that is a cautionary tale for Taiwan for sure. Steph. Hey, Steph says kids are being mandated by colleges. Oh, everywhere. It's everywhere. I disagree with that. Lima Lisovska. That sounds like a Russian name, maybe? Beautiful name. Laima, beautiful name. Could Sadra Wagenknecht win next German election? I wish I knew more about Germany. I can't even pronounce that person's name. So, but it certainly looks like a German name. I can tell you that. Oh, Wagenknecht. If that ain't German, then I don't know what it is. But so could they? I don't know who that is. So I'll have to say, in theory, yes. All right. Any other? Oh no, that's it. No more super chats, no more people. I'll just say this. This person says the HARP array in Alaska can absolutely cause earthquakes. We've known this for 20 years. It's not a conspiracy theory. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Don't know. And excess mortality, 40% in USA right now by Insurance Company Day. There's a lot of, if you watch, you want to hear, keep up to date on excess mortality issues, I would go to Dr. John Campbell. That's one of my favorite channels. He's a very reasonable soul. He says he's not an unreasonable guy, and he's not an extreme guy. He's straight to the point. He has great guests. Dr. John Campbell I highly recommend him. Let's go to Rich and see. It's not because conspiracy theory. They earn the reputation they have, but won't accept accountability for it. Exactly. It's not crazy conspiracy theories to suspect these rat bastards of everything because they're up to no good. Let's see. Anything else? Well, let's look here. I'm sure somebody there says, all right, on Rockfin, Ron the Wolf says you're not taking into account that the non-Fox News voters are simply not hearing about the East Palestine situation. They tell the people the EPA was there and says everything is okay. That's all the information they get. Oh, okay. Good point. Anything else? I blame the wind for not providing the answers. There you go. And I'm sure the wind is very upset. Somebody's a liar. Okay, darn, I didn't get that. Didn't get anything out of that. Let's go with, is there anybody else saying something here on Newland is a Nazi Bandera person. I inserted the word person myself. You won't get a revolt in Europe because they will use each other's armies to suppress any internal dissent. Okay. Choosy heretics choose carnation revolution now, says Dr. John Campbell. Was kind of a milquetoast early on, but he's standing at the plate now with no intention to bunt. Well, I think he was very here's the thing about Dr. John Campbell. I think he knows he's in a place where he has to step very carefully. I think he knows he's watching in minefields, and I think he's been very responsible and careful walking around those minefields. I think Dr. John Campbell knows this is where I can go on YouTube. This is where I can't. I want to be a person who can provide a lot of information and data to people. He does something that I believe in, and that is he'll provide you data and information and allow you to make your own assumptions, to come to your own conclusions based on that data. But I think he wasn't milquetoast. He was doing as much as he could on YouTube and still being able to stay on YouTube. And I think that was a good move on his part. We needed somebody there. But Senator Mike Lee be the crack in the dam. I don't know. But so let's talk about this. You have some Republicans who are like, yeah, we can't go. We should not go. We got to end this war in Ukraine. Why? So we can start an even more dangerous war with China. So you've got people who are saying, we don't want to die from nuclear war with Russia. We want to die from nuclear war with China. Well, if you're dying from nuclear war, what difference does it make which direction the missiles are coming from? Oh, are they coming across Alaska? Or are they going the other direction? No. So realistically, we got to look at some of these people and say, are they trying to stop war, or are they simply trying to redirect to a war that they're more comfortable with? I think there's a lot of that in the Republican Party. Babe says Dr. John Campbell is 180 degrees from where he was. Yeah. I agree. Well, he has followed he's done something that here's what we would ask anybody to do. You start somewhere, right? And research information and follow where the research takes you. That's what you do. Wherever the research takes you, you follow that. I think Dr. John Campbell has done that. I don't think he's been unreasonable. He's not put himself in a position where he could be attacked. And he's taken a lot of data and applied that to the issues that he had concern. And as I said, I think he's done a fantastic job. I'm a big fan of Dr. John Campbell. Well, gentlemen, let's see what this says. China and Russian Federation teaming up. That should concentrate minds. There definitely are. Russia, yeah, but they're not staying down anymore. How about we go with, if nuclear weapons didn't exist, we would all be constantly fighting wars because it's profitable. Well, they exist, and we're still fighting wars because it's profitable. Conspiracy theories are never about how the poor are screwing the rich to be against CT researchers, to be classist. Mike Lee is a Mormon Republican who wants to destroy all social services and assistance to poor people. Look, we got two different kinds. We got Republicans that want to do that. We got Democrats that want to do that. Bottom line is this. That's what our system does. We have a system that it's a neoliberal system. And whether they argue they're for it or against it, and ultimately, the neoliberalism produces austerity. Neoliberalism simply does this. It takes all money and it extracts it from the bottom and moves it to the top. That's what neoliberalism does. You can argue about the policies and all that kind of stuff. And what do? They're going to cut any programs that help the poor. They're going to cut anything that helps the poor. And they're going to increase benefits and tax benefits and all of that for the wealthy and the corporations. It's austerity, neoliberal austerity. It takes money from the bottom and moves it to the top. And if you don't believe me, just look at what it's done. That's what neoliberalism has done. That's what it has taken money from the bottom and moved it to the top. Oh, I've only heard him acknowledge the pipeline. Who's that? Biden or somebody? I don't know. But whatever the case, acknowledge the pipeline. Okay. I guess I missed the rest of that. All right, everyone. Well, thanks a lot. It's 1:17 here in Maryland, just outside of DC and Baltimore and Annapolis. Barrett, here's something I got to comment on. We need a class war. Bad news, Barrett Mason. We already got a class war. The oligarchs declared war on the working class and the poor in many, many years ago. And it's a genocide, to be quite frank. They've been winning in a genocide, but we need to fight back. How's that? That's what I would say. What's interesting? Well, let me ask you, here's a question. Why do you think that people are not asking tech giants like Google why they are promoting propaganda? After all, it is their algorithm that grows the flow of it. I think people are. I think people like us are. I think there are a lot of people who are asking that question, who are pushing that question. That's what the Twitter files are about. So all is going well. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Wow, 1,600 people. That means hopefully we got 1,600 likes and we got 1,600 people who are going to also become subscribers, be members or whatever the hell over at Rockfin. Thank you very much for doing that. So when and if they throw me off of YouTube, you'll be on Rockfin. We got lots of ways to help the channel. We got Buy Me a Coffee, Cash App, PayPal, and Patreon. So if you can do that, that's fine. Thanks a lot, everybody. It's been a great Saturday hanging out with my friends. Peace. I'm out.